The Untold Journal Entries, Pride and Prejudice, in a Bluestocking style. Humorous takes on a much-loved classic, written and performed by Stephanie Poppins. September 1812. Morning Entry. Lady Catherine de Bourgh. I am in such a state of agitation, my hand trembles as I take up my pen. The intelligence I have received today regarding that most pernicious society of females, that so-called Bluestocking group, has filled me with such righteous indignation that I can scarce contain myself with the bounds of propriety. It has come to my attention through reliable sources, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, that impertinent creature who dared to refuse my nephew's generous condescension in offering for her hand, ridiculous as it may be, has been corrupted by association with this subversive assemblage of women who fancy themselves scholars. These deluded females gather together under the pretence of intellectual discourse, reading books that ought to be left to their betters, and, most shocking of all, discussing matters of politics and philosophy as though they possessed the capacity for such elevated thoughts. The very notion is an affront to the natural order, that women of inferior birth and breeding should presume to educate themselves beyond their station, to read the same volumes as gentlemen of rank and learning, is nothing short of revolutionary madness. And now I see how this poisonous influence has emboldened Miss Bennet to display such shocking audacity in my drawing-room at Rosings, walking about with her head held high as though she were my equal, speaking her opinions as freely as any man, and showing not the smallest deference to my superior rank and understanding. When I think of how she dared to contradict me on matters of music and accomplishments, I can now trace the source of her impertinence directly to these Bluestocking associations. No young woman of proper breeding would ever display such forward behaviour without having her natural modesty corrupted by exposure to these radical notions of female enervation. I am informed these women actually encourage one another to write letters to newspapers and engage in learned correspondence with gentlemen scholars. Can there be anything more destructive to feminine virtue than such presumptuous behaviour? They meet in drawing-rooms, that should be reserved for proper feminine pursuits such as needlework, gentle conversation, and music. They debate literature and natural philosophy as though they were members of Parliament. I shudder to think what effect such associations must have had upon poor Charlotte Lucas, now Mrs. Collins. She was always a sensible girl until she began corresponding with that dreadful circle, though I'm pleased she had the good sense to marry my clergyman and remove herself from Hertfordshire's corrupting influences. But I detect even in her a certain independence of thought that I fear was not there before. The blame for Miss Bennet's insufferable pride and obstinacy must be laid squarely at the feet of these Bluestocking conspirators. They fill young women's heads with the most dangerous ideas, that learning is not the exclusive province of men, that women might engage in scholarly pursuits, that a lady might express opinions on subjects beyond domestic management and the arts. Such notions can only lead to the complete overthrow of proper social distinctions. I am horrified. It is perfectly clear to me now why Miss Bennet possessed the extraordinary presumption to reject my nephew's addresses. No woman in her right senses, no woman who understood her proper place in society, would refuse such an advantageous connection. Though I must admit I take comfort in the fact she did. I have half a mind to write to Lady Dalrymple and suggest we organise the ladies of our acquaintance to counteract this pernicious influence. We must make it known in all the best circles any association with these so-called learned ladies marks one as a person of dangerous principle, unfit for the society of their betters. And I shall make it known to my nephew he owes it to his ancestors to stay away from such riff-raff. The very foundation of civilized society depends upon each person knowing and keeping to their proper station. When young women of inferior birth presume to educate themselves beyond their circumstances, when they begin to fancy themselves the intellectual equals of their superiors, the natural order itself is threatened. This Bluestocking movement must be exposed for what it truly is: a subversive attempt to overturn the God-ordained hierarchy that has served England so well. I shall speak to Mr. Collins about preaching against such dangerous tendencies among the women of his parish. Surely it is his Christian duty to warn against the spiritual pride that leads to such unwomanly behaviour. Evening entry. I have just completed the most urgent correspondence of my life, a letter to my nephew Fitzwilliam, that may well save the Darcy name from irreparable disgrace. The more I contemplate the implications of his potential attachment to Miss Elizabeth Bennet, the more horrified I become at the catastrophe that might have been. I have written to him in the strongest possible terms, detailing the pernicious influence of these Bluestocking associations, and the corrupting effect they have had upon Miss Bennet's character. A man of my nephew's understanding must surely comprehend that connecting our family to a woman of such radical principles would be tantamount to introducing revolutionary ideas into the very heart of Pemberley itself. Consider the implications for future generations. Should he be so misguided as to ally himself with a creature whose mind has been poisoned by notions of female intellectual equality, what manner of children might result from such union? I shudder to think of young ladies raised by a mother who believes woman should engage in scholarly pursuits, who thinks herself capable of philosophical discourse, who has been taught to value learning over proper feminine accomplishment. Such daughters would be utterly unfit for marriage into families of distinction. What gentleman of rank would align himself with a young woman who had been raised to think herself the intellectual equal of men? They would be unmarriageable, worse than unmarriageable. They would be dangerous influences upon other impressionable young females. And the sons, heaven preserve us, from the spectacle of young men raised by a mother who questions the natural order, who believes that women are capable of the same elevated thoughts as their masculine superiors. Such boys would grow into men lacking proper understanding of female submission and masculine authority. The very structure of English society would crumble under such influence. I have impressed upon my nephew his duty to his family name, to Pemberley, and to future generations. I demand he sever any connection with Miss Bennet immediately. The contamination of Bluestocking principles must not be allowed to infiltrate our ancient and honourable lineage. I have also taken the liberty of suggesting he consider my daughter with renewed attention. Raised under my careful guidance, she would never dream of engaging in intellectual discourse beyond what is proper for a lady. She understands her place. She values feminine accomplishments above masculine learning, and she would raise children who respect the established order of things. If my nephew ignores my warning, if he allows his temporary infatuation to blind him to his greater duties, the consequences will extend far beyond his own domestic happiness. The corruption of one great family inevitably spreads to others. I pray my letter reaches him before it is too late. The preservation of everything we hold dear may just depend upon his wisdom in this matter, and I shall do my best to ensure he is as wise as his ancestors were.